Welcome all everyone. Here we are glad to have Jacob giving us a talk about how to expand your research profile. This is a great thing. It's a great thing to know. I mean, I'm super curious to hear the talk. Jacob is a faculty at UC Berkeley. Before that, he was a PhD student at Stanford with Percy Liang, and he works on robustness, AI alignment, and reward specification, and lots of other cool stuff. Jacob, we should start.
Cool. Yeah, thanks a lot for inviting me. I'll be talking about how to expand your research profile. So I guess there's kind of four parts of this that I'll get to. The first just is the question of like how to choose what problems to work on in the first place. And then once you have an idea of what to work on, kind of how to actually go about defining a kind of concrete research project along those lines and assessing whether that project is feasible, developing a broader research vision, and then also finding collaborators. So this talk will be very meta. So I guess I'm not actually going to tell you what to work on, but I'll tell you how to identify good problems, at least from my perspective. One caveat here is just like all advice is kind of the advice that the advice giver wishes they had heard earlier. So in some sense, what I'll say is kind of shaped by my own experiences. I'm sure you could also get a lot of valuable insight by talking to other people, and they would have different perspectives. But this is mine. So I'll jump into it. I'll try to kind of keep things relatively short to leave time for questions. So also feel free to jump in the middle as well. So I guess let's start with what to work on. And I think this question really is, one of the more important questions to think about. I think choice of project actually matters a lot. I think the best problems are many times more impactful than a kind of randomly chosen research problem. And I think, one of the things I got better at over the course of grad school was just problem selection. I also, learned a bunch of technical skills, but I think problem selection is the place where there's really, a high ceiling to just keep improving. I think the first thing that can be helpful is to just find some heuristic that works for you for identifying problems that are either impactful or fundamental or kind of good in whatever way your research taste is going for. So I listed a few that I tend to use. The first is have people, is there something where I feel like people have been going about this in the wrong way for a while, where there's been work, but I feel like somehow it's it's going in the wrong direction, and there's some other direction I really wish people would explore. That can be a good sign that a problem is ripe for attacking. Does something feel kind of under incentivized relative to its impact? That I think, I guess for more empirical stuff, often things that kind of require some initial legwork that maybe isn't as glamorous, but that has a big payoff at the end. I think that, like, I'd say, for instance, the ImageNet data set was a really good example of this. I think you also have this in theory, maybe not quite as much, but I think it is still a good heuristic to look at. One really big one is, will this change how people think? So often, when I'm selecting a problem or writing a paper, that's one of my biggest goals is, is the paper I'm going to write, are people going to think differently about something before and after? I think for me, that's kind of one of the most sort of profound sources of impact you can have. And it usually means you did something pretty cool if you can change how people think about something. And then another is kind of just like, is this outside the convex hull of current ideas? I think this is particularly useful, I think both for applied and theoretical work, probably more so for theoretical work, because you might have a problem that feels pretty natural and maybe is similar to other problems that have been solved, but somehow all the standard tools don't apply. And then that can be a good opportunity to kind of develop some new techniques that might then apply to a lot of other problems. I guess to continue on what to work on, I think one really important concept that I didn't appreciate enough early on in grad school is thinking in terms of option value. So I think a general philosophy that's worth cultivating is kind of when picking problems, like swing for the fences, pick things that, you know, feel like it would be really awesome if it worked out. Maybe it's kind of ambitious, you're not sure if it will work out, but then find ways to figure out early if you think you can actually get the result you want. And so the key thing here is that you don't have to finish every project you start. I think early on in grad school, I would just like pick a project, and then I was like totally committed to it. And then, you know, I'd work on it, I guess, either until I solved it or until like I had spent so long on it that I gave up. But I think by the end of grad school, I think I finished more like 10 to 20% of the projects I started. And that might sound kind of crazy, but the key thing is like I discarded most of them within 2 to 3 weeks. So like the thing you don't want to do is be like, okay, you know, I've been at this for a few months, but like I'm kind of, you know, annoyed because things are going slowly. So, you know, I guess I'll just give up. Like I think you don't necessarily want to do that because perseverance is really important. But you want to kind of try to figure out as early as possible if there's just like, you know, core reasons why this project isn't going to work. For instance, is there some counterexample that just makes the thing you're proving false? Or is like, you know, the like empirical thing you're trying to do relying on having some data set that no one, you know, has ever collected and that you don't have a good way of collecting, then it doesn't matter how good your ideas are because you just, you know, won't be able to run them. And I think, you know, there's like lots of other ways to kind of identify most likely failure points. I often do something that I call de-risking, which is when I start out a project, I kind of list out the things that need to go right for the project to succeed. And then I kind of rank them by like how likely they are to go wrong. And then I try to kind of like figure out as quickly as possible whether the things that might go wrong will go wrong. You know, so maybe like I'm hoping that some lemma is true. Well, let's see if that lemma is true. Yeah, I'm hoping that like some method is good enough to, you know, be used as a component in some pipeline. Find ways to kind of test that quickly. I wrote an essay that goes into a lot of detail on how you can do this. It's kind of nerdy. It uses the language of Markov decision processes to think about optimal research effort allocation in terms of value of information. But I think that there are some nice concrete insights in there. So the title's on the slide if you want to read it. It's called Research as a Stochastic Decision Process. But the main high level point here is you kind of want to find ways to quickly figure out if an ambitious project is feasible, because that will let you, one, try more ambitious projects, and two, kind of not waste lots and lots of time on something that's not going to work out. And then I guess just finally, you know, beyond the heuristics I talked about earlier, here's some other good heuristics, I think, for kind of identifying potentially good problems. One is if there's kind of like some socially important trend that feels connected to some conceptual obstacle, that can be a good place, especially for kind of conceptual work, finding good definitions or good kind of formal settings. Just to give an example of that, I think there's been a lot of work on this in the context of feedback loops and decision systems related to things like performativity, fairness, strategic interactions. I think Moritz Hart is an example of a researcher who I think is very good at thinking about this sort of thing. Another would be like confusion around some decision relevant problems. So if there's like some kind of fuzzy question that people argue about a lot, like if you can come up with some way to make it, you know, more precise and less confusing, then that can be very valuable. So an example of a kind of like confused seeming but maybe kind of important question is will just like deeper neural networks with more data solve everything, which I think is something that people argue about a lot on the internet, at least. and it's often not even clear what the argument is about. I don't know how to make this more clear, so I don't actually have a concrete example of research problem in mind here, but this is sort of an example of a kind of like question where it's like, if you can find ways to make it less confused, then that can be pretty valuable. And then a related thing to that is we can kind of like concretize some amorphous but important question. So here, I guess I do have an example. The question would be, are models learning what we want them to? And then there's a lot of ways you could concretize this. I think this example is just one specific one, but kind of the existence of adversarial examples arguably shows that there's something kind of very fundamentally strange about what models are learning. And so that gives a kind of like very vivid answer to this question in a concrete way that I think, led to a lot of progress in machine learning. Okay, so let me move on from choosing problems to kind of defining new research projects. So I guess the kind of interface between this is maybe a little bit blurry, but an example, just as like an example here, what's like a recent research project that that we were trying to concretize. I guess like so I guess me and Nina, like a little while ago, were thinking about kind of market effects and recommender systems, and we kind of knew we wanted to work on that, but you want to kind of turn it into a concrete problem. So what sorts of things did we do? We kind of like brainstormed what the like important market effects might be. We read a bunch of kind of economic literature about recommender systems. And so in general, I think when defining a new research project, it's good to have a kind of mix of top-down and bottom-up thinking. So top-down is kind of thinking like more philosophically, like kind of what should the problem be. Bottom-up is trying to get data. It could either be like empirical data from running experiments. It could be kind of data by like reading papers that kind of discuss some phenomenon. And so the top-down kind of helps give like the grand vision and helps kind of ideally what you would like to solve. The bottom up gives you concrete data, kind of helps pin down what's feasible, and sometimes also gives you kind of surprising findings that make you rethink your top down picture. And so generally, like a good process for defining a new research project is kind of trying to unify these two. So if you only do bottom up, then you can be in danger of being too incremental, because you're kind of just looking at things that are near where you already have data. But if you only do top down, then you might, you'll be kind of ungrounded. Maybe you can write down some problem, but it might not really correspond to anything. Or maybe you just like stay too fuzzy and high level and never really write down a really concrete problem. So the key is to kind of unify these two. I think it kind of varies a lot from researcher to researcher what works best for them in terms of the mix here. For me personally, I'm kind of a very conceptual thinker, so I usually start top down and then kind of use bottom up information to kind of filter projects and refine my thinking. The other thing I would just say here is it's good to start early. So you don't want to be like coming up with some new project to work on because it's like 6 weeks before like the Colt deadline or the ICML deadline or the stock deadline or whatever, and you're like, I should write a paper. You kind of want to be thinking about this kind of, with room for the project to breathe, so that you don't feel forced into kind of only doing things that you could solve in some time budget. So this is kind of one of those like, important but never urgent seeming tasks that is still good to just kind of do. Is often actually I'll start thinking about what problem I want to work on next while I'm kind of in the process of finishing my current project. And then going one level higher out, developing a research vision. Kind of the corollary to starting early is, I think, when developing an overall research vision, which might be kind of like a kind of overall direction that might lead to many specific projects, it's good to be ambitious but patient. So I think picking big problems that maybe aren't immediately clear how to address, but spending, just over time thinking about them and like coming up with angles of attack. The way I like to think about this is what you kind of are pondering today affects what you can work on a year from now. So generally, I've kind of pivoted research areas many times throughout my career, and those pivots generally don't happen because I just wake up one day and I suddenly want to work on some new problem. It's that there's some new area that seemed interesting to me. Maybe it wasn't even like a super well defined area yet. I wanted to kind of think about how to do work in that area. And so, I'd start reading papers on related things. I'd start kind of brainstorming by myself. I'd kind of talk to other people. And then that kind of gradually kind of expands the scope of problems you can work on because you just have a kind of better insight into the area. So kind of the corollary to this is that there's a lot of value in just reaching conceptual clarity around some question for yourself, because this better positions you to make progress on future projects. As a kind of concrete example, I think around my like third or fourth year in grad school, I ended up pivoting to work on a lot of research around robustness in machine learning. And that had come from a lot of thinking. Actually, it started out as like something that didn't have anything to do with that, which was I was trying to think about how to make machine learning systems kind of more modular in the same way that you'd want like a normal software system to be modular. And then that ended up not really being like the right way to think about things. But after kind of several steps of deconfusion, I realized what I really wanted was like for things to just robustly work, and like modular software is kind of good because it robustly works. And then that's how I kind of ended up working on robustness. And it was nice because also since I kind of came to it from this unusual angle, I had maybe somewhat different ideas than other people had tried before. And so, another thing I think that example illustrates is when trying to kind of develop a new area or move into a new area, it's good to just kind of get any bearings at all to start with. So, just like one concrete problem that you can say something interesting about. Once you can do one thing, then you can, by induction, you can do n things. And I think like the getting from like nothing to something is often the hardest place to start, and then a lot more comes after that. I guess other kind of advice I'd give here, I think curiosity and just like an aesthetic sense for what's interesting are both very effective heuristics. So you don't want to be like too prescriptive of like, oh, I have to work on this thing. If something just like seems really interesting or piques your curiosity, I think that can be good to work on. And yeah, like in terms of being ambitious but patient, like just kind of pick some important area and just kind of like marinate in it, like kind of read everything about it, think about it a lot, try to spend at least, a couple hours a week just doing kind of open-ended brainstorming without any specific like need to solve a problem today, but just kind of thinking about what's out there. And I think, over the years, this will really boost what you can do. The final thing I'll talk about is finding collaborators. I guess when I was a grad student, my main experience was with more senior collaborators. So that's probably what I can say the most about. I think generally, I mean, your advisor obviously is probably your primary collaborator. Other faculty, mentors from industry, research internships. I think these are kind of the main sources of senior collaborators. So I guess what I'd say there is, I think one thing is that junior faculty can be a particularly good source of additional collaborations, because especially someone in their first year or two, they probably don't have that many students, so they'll have a lot of bandwidth. And especially if you're a third or fourth year, that can be a really good time to kind of reach out to some junior faculty who kind of work on interesting stuff that's related to what you do, but maybe a little bit different. I would also say that in terms of selecting collaborators, you probably don't. I mean, it's fine, but it's probably not like the most impactful to just pick someone who does exactly what you're already doing. I think the best collaborators have overlapping interests, but will pull you in a slightly different direction than you would have gone in otherwise. I mean, it should be a direction that you want to be pulled in, but I think that's where collaborators can be really really valuable, is they can kind of expand the scope of questions that you can work on, and maybe also teach you different skills than you might have naturally developed. So I think that's kind of how I think about senior collaborators. I guess also, in addition to junior faculty, I guess postdocs also can be good for this, because they also will often have a reasonable amount of bandwidth. It's a bit, I think it's like a bit more variable, because sometimes postdocs are just like very busy trying to get a job. And so, I mean, that it could actually mean they're very motivated to work with you, or that could mean that they're just going to be busy with the job market. So that one, I guess, is something to assess more. Um, so that's senior collaborators, junior collaborators. Um, so this, oh, sorry, this is, okay, sorry, I confused myself for a sec. So, yeah, I just talked about postdocs, more experienced PhD students, kind of similar deal. Although often in contrast to postdocs, kind of senior PhD students usually probably only have like one or two junior people they're working with. So you're more likely to get a fair amount of bandwidth. The flip side is they might have a bit less mentorship experience. So there's pros and cons to that. And then if you're one of the more senior people, then I guess junior collaborators would be kind of junior PhD students and undergrads. And I think I had a really good experience mentoring junior students when I was at Stanford. I guess Aditi and Pongwe were the two people I worked with the most closely, and they've kind of both gone on to do great things. Mostly not because of me, but just because they're really good. But I think it was good for getting mentorship experience. It was good just kind of to like make more progress on my own research agenda, because I kind of had these really like smart, hardworking people who were helping to push it forward. I think the main things I'd say there, if you're kind of the senior person providing mentorship, is one, maybe reach out to your advisor or other people to just get advice on how to be a good mentor. It's kind of different from being an individual contributor, because you also want to make sure that that person is getting room to grow. I think often it can be good to kind of trust people and let them grow into that trust. So I find if you kind of assume people can do things, then they'll usually live up to those expectations. If you kind of micromanage and kind of don't give trust, then people will kind of live down to that expectation. So that would be maybe my number one high level advice. But the other one is, yeah, talk to a mentor to get advice here. And then I'd say the most important thing on the collaboration front is around problem formulation. So I think if you're going to have a large collaboration, you should start by having a small group of people kind of define a problem that you want to work on, and then maybe pull in other people who are interested in that problem. I think it's really hard to do good problem formulation with a group of more than 2 to 3 people total. So that's you and 1 to 2 other people, and those people need to like really be have like really high bandwidth communication and be talking a lot. So the thing to really avoid is what I call problem selection by committee, where you just get like 5 people together every week, and you're like, okay, what should we work on? I can't explain exactly why that doesn't work, but just in my experience, that's almost never led to good results. Whereas having a couple of people come up with something they're excited about and pull people in, that works much better. And I think that's all I have. So maybe I'll stop sharing and I can take questions.
Yeah, thanks so much for the great talk.